Hey, so today, guys, we are tackling the real and often pressing questions about managing money on a tight budget. Things like, how do you decide which financial goals to focus on first? Or what if there's hardly any income left over to actually start saving? And what do you do when it feels like there's nothing left to cut from your budget? We're also going to talk about handling unexpected expenses, making budgeting easier, and getting a reluctant spouse on board with paying off debt. So if you're ready to gain control of your finances, this is going to be a great episode for you to listen to. Stay tuned. Hey guys, welcome to today's show. I am Brad Nelson, founder of Debt Free Dad. I paid off about $45,000 of debt. I've been debt free now for more than 11 years outside of my mortgage. I've also been fortunate to help thousands of other people save and pay off tens of millions of dollars with the work that we do here at Debt Free Dad.
And I'm Amber Taylor, and we paid off $54,000 in 20 months, and we have been living debt-free outside of our mortgage since 2018.
And my name is Chris Hawkins, and my wife and I started our journey way back in 2005. And from 2005 to 2008, we paid off right around $90,000 worth of debt and have been debt-free except for our house ever since.
And I'm Katie Hatfield. I am still on my journey to debt freedom, and in the last 6 years, I have paid off over $189,000 on a single income.
And my name is Ryan Nelson. My wife and I paid off about $160,000 over 8 years while raising 3 kids.
Now, after listening to this episode, you guys, if you want to take this a step further and you'd like to get better results with your finances in as little as 30 to 60 days, we're going to be sharing some details about how you can get started with that later on in today's episode. So guys, we wanted to take some time and really do an episode. It's been quite a while since we've done an episode where we've taken some of the most frequently asked questions that we get from either you, our listeners, or people who join our workshops, or even our Roots members, or even people who comment on a lot of the social media channels that we have out there where we are posting a lot of content to help people take control of their finances. And the cool part about this is that all 5 of us on today's episode all have a different experience with getting out of debt. We all have a different background. We all had different resources and challenges that we face. So I think by going through some of these more FAQ questions that we get, it's going to be a great opportunity for you to learn how we kind of overcame some of these things, because I feel like there's probably a few of us that have experienced a lot of these things that we're going to talk about here today. So the first question that I have today is, what financial goals should I prioritize first? This individual says, I currently have very little savings and I have multiple debts like credit cards, student loans, and my car loan. Currently, I am investing in my company's 401k plan, but my goal is to at least pay off my credit cards, but I also want to boost my savings account. I'm not sure what I should focus on first.
Since I was in this position when I first started, I definitely feel like getting that savings built up. So I had something to go to when emergencies, and notice I said when emergencies happen, because when emergencies happen before, swipe, 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 there goes my credit card, and I was maxing those out. And definitely having the savings, I didn't think I could find $1,000 anywhere, but I did it, and that was like, oh, okay, well, then let's try the next step. And then paying off my smallest credit card and having that payment roll into my next credit card payment, I'm like, wait a minute, I'm actually gaining momentum. This is amazing. So I would definitely focus on the savings just to get yourself out of the habit of swiping your card and getting further into debt.
Okay. Now, the premise of this question was, my goal is to pay off my credit cards, but also want to boost my savings account. It makes it sound like they want to do both at the same time. Okay, yes, you're going to have to pay off at least the minimums on your debts, and you need to get an emergency fund in place. Then, if I were you, I would cut out all savings, including the 401k plan. That's what my wife and I did. So I'm not telling you that you should do this without having done it myself. The idea was we wanted every possible dollar that we could throw at the debt. Okay, now I'm a big believer in compound interest, and I understand that the sooner you can start investing and saving, that's more years worth of work that your money has moving forward. But you'll be surprised when you get out of debt, and I think we all can probably agree on this. When you get out of debt, how much money you have left over now and how much more saving that you can do, and you'll be able to catch up tremendously fast. So emergency funds, savings first, then debt, then come back to savings for a bigger emergency fund, purchases, wealth building, and those things.
Yeah, and I would just say it just, I would say I agree with everything you said, Chris. And I think this is where it just becomes like everyone's got to kind of have their own approach. And for this person as well, a lot of times if you're investing in a company 401k, you're getting a match. And I would say if you are looking at all your bills and all your debt and you're making good money and you can make good progress on your debt without having to stop investing, we didn't stop investing because there were things we did where we saved money in other areas. Like we downsized our home. We did different things. We sold a car. I bought an old used car, and then we were able to keep investing that way. But if you do all of your bills and you're looking at everything and you're like, we have $20 left over, there's no way, then I totally agree. I think then, cut out that investing, cut out pretty much anything that you can to throw at debt and get your emergency fund funded and things like that. That is just for me. I don't think this is the way to do it. It's just, I think you have to figure out what works for you and what makes you comfortable. If you don't want to stop investing in your 401k, then just make sure that you are maybe potentially going to cut other places to make up that difference.
Well, I'll agree with that in the context that if you're not really serious, and there's a lot of folks out there who don't get serious, and I wouldn't cut the 401k plan, particularly if you have a company match. All right. So maybe you prove to yourself that you're serious and then cut back to use that money for something else, because the last thing I want you to do is to spend 5 years and not get out of debt, but also not having saved for retirement. So it's that fine line. There is a balance.
Yeah, Chris, you took the words right out of my mouth. And I think that would have been my first question just on the 401k part is how intense do you want to be about getting out of debt? Do you want to do it super fast or as fast as you possibly can? Then maybe that's something you consider cutting. But I also, at the same time, like Ryan just said, it hurts to tell people maybe stop doing the match because number one, that's free money that you're getting. And if it's like, if your budget can allow you to keep the match, I say keep it for sure. But if it is a situation where, that extra match is making things tight, then you may have to back off a little bit until you pay off some other things. And maybe you can bounce back to that. The only other thing I would say is in this situation is I felt like this is kind of like me when I first started. I wanted to build my emergency fund. I wanted to pay down debt. And I also wanted to start investing. And, you have too many things going on, and when you have all this money going out to these little things, it's hard to make really any sort of more momentum or progress. So my suggestion to this person based off of, our answers today is pick whatever it is that you're comfortable with doing. I suggest savings like Katie did and just focus on one thing at a time and then move down that list rather than trying to do it all. And I think that's one of the mistakes a lot of people make is that when they want to improve their finances, they tend to focus on too many areas at once and it just dilutes their efforts.
And I think at the beginning too, especially with a 401k, and the reason that I'm a little like, you got to be serious about paying off debt because you can it's easy to get an influx of cash. Like, okay, I'm going to cut out contributing to my retirement. And that influx of cash could be $200, $300, $400, $500, $600 a month that you were contributing. Well, now all of a sudden you've got $300 or $400, $500 all of a sudden extra. We all have great intentions. I'm going to totally put this all towards debt. Well, suddenly if you've got bad behaviors, you're now spending that $300, $400, $500 that you were investing. So to me, fix your behaviors. And then if it gets to the point where you want to cut it and you're doing well and you're like not going to be tempted, because I know for me, if we would have stopped investing, I most likely would have bought a new car or something stupid because I wasn't being serious. I'm going to pay off. I'm totally going to do this, and then you get the money and you're like, yeah, I'm not going to do it.
All right. Next question is how can I start saving with so little income left over after obviously all of their expenses are paid off?
I think this can be a tough one because it could be that, all of your expenses are necessary and you really don't have any extra income to save. Or it could be you have a bunch of subscriptions or stuff that you're spending your money on and you got to go back and you got to look at those expenses that you're spending your money on, whether it's eating out and other things. And then you realize, maybe I do have some extra money where I could start saving. So I think you really got to go back and look at your last 3 to 6 months of spending and really hone in where that money's going. And you may be surprised at how much money you actually find that you have extra for saving.
Yeah, I always find this question pretty interesting when I get budgets from individuals where they say, I don't have anything else to cut out. And I think each person, obviously can make their own decisions about what they're willing to sacrifice, obviously, to reach their goals. And I think, you know, there are some people who are willing to sacrifice more, and there are some people who don't want to sacrifice as much. And I think that's what this real answer is going to come down to. But time and time again, I'll get people's budgets who said they have nothing to squeeze out of it. And I can usually find quite a few areas where they can squeeze out of it. It's just they don't want to, right?
Yeah.
And that's the hard part. And I think even when I was first starting, it was hard for me at first too to give up some of those nice little things like going out to eat, or, you know, cable TV back in the day. Of course, they didn't have subscription services when I was getting out of debt, but, you know, it was hard for me to give some of those things up. So I took like tiny steps towards it. I cut out a little bit and realized I don't miss that stuff nearly as much as I thought I would. And I'd be willing to cut out more and more. And eventually, you know, it didn't feel as painful doing it all at one time. But the other thing too is you have to consider is if you don't have any money to save, it could be an income thing. You know, can you look for ways to make extra money? Are there side hustles? Or there's so many different opportunities out there just to make money on your phone now. I mean, you could easily take advantage of some of those things. Now, are they going to be ideal? No. I mean, when I was getting out of debt, I was working 60, 65, sometimes 70 hours a week. I didn't like it. I hated every minute of it, but it was worth the work because now I don't have to do that anymore. So you might have to put in a little bit of time sacrifice in there too, and look at the income situation.
So I would say you also need to ask yourself, how important is it to save, right? Because if it's really important, you'll find some way to save money. Now, the other question is, you don't have to save a whole lot initially. Just prove to yourself that you can do it. Anything is better than nothing. And when you gain a little bit of confidence, it'll help you figure out how to do a little bit more. And maybe even, I'm going to do a cheap plug for one of my podcast episodes here recently, is if you need to, set up a savings account or a checking account at a different bank and automate where your employer sends, say, $50 a paycheck, just to pick a number, into that account. The rest of it comes into your main checking account, and then learn to live off of that. I think sometimes just not having it quickly available and all you have is what you have in your checking account, you'll find a way to live off of that.
And we've always said, go through your stuff because you have lots of stuff and you can sell it. My first garage sale, I made like $1,200. I was like, why haven't I done this before? Because that was one day of making money of all this stuff that was just sitting around that I wasn't using. So yeah, if you run out of income, find other ways to get income.
Now, the next question, very similar, but I'm interested to see if you guys have any different perspective on it. This individual says, how can I reduce my expenses when there's nothing left to cut out? And this one, I will say, I can usually find areas where people can reduce their expenses. Not all the time, because there are some people who are able to like squeeze out as much as they can, and they're kind of like, you know, at the end of whatever they can do. And then it's an income thing, right? Like we just talked about. But what are some things for you guys? Because obviously you probably went through this, but were there some surprise areas where you're like, I can't cut anything else out, and then all of a sudden you were like, I can actually save money with some of these expenses?
Yeah, for me, I mean, this is where I think you have to really get a lot of soul searching about when we say that, when I hear that, when there's nothing left to cut, I'm thinking like you're driving a really crappy car, you're living in a, you know, an okay house, but not a fancy house. You know what I mean? So like for us, like being real with myself, when I felt this way, like, hey, we don't have anything left to cut. We were living in a big house. We had new cars, big car payments, all this stuff. It's like, yeah, there was truly nothing left to cut, but the things left to cut were the luxuries that we were paying for. Because I think that's a lot of people, what I see in the mindset is I only have $100 left over after paying my bills, but you have two cars that are $700 car payments. You have a house payment that you can't afford. And it's like, we downsized a house. We sold a house. We moved to something smaller. We sold a car. I drove like a $3,000 used car for a while. And I mean, we instantly gave ourselves a huge raise by doing that. Now I know housing is different now. Things are different. So I know that someone's listening to that being like, cars are expensive, houses. I get it. But the reality is when there's nothing left to cut, if there truly isn't, then it can become an income thing, like we said. But for me, I just really feel like for most people that are really trying to get out of debt or want to get out of debt or thinking of it, it's having to give up the lifestyle that you've kind of grown accustomed to a little bit for a while. Doesn't mean forever, but for a while, you're going to just have to get uncomfortable.
Yep. And that's the hard part, is getting uncomfortable.
And sometimes it's not just cutting everything out 100%. Like, I used to get my hair and my nails done every month, and that was hundreds of dollars. And when I stopped dyeing my whole hair and just did a few highlights, it was way cheaper. And guess what? You can do your own nails. So, like, there are other ways. You don't have to always buy books. There's this thing called the library where they're free and they'll just let you use them. And then you just have to remember to give them back, and it doesn't cost you anything. Sometimes you just need that other ways of thinking. And again, going back to the mindsets and behaviors that might just have to change a little bit. And again, it just has to be until you're in a place where you could add them back in again. But honestly, I don't miss going to the salon every month or anything like that. So.
And I think, though, even negotiating your bills, like if you are looking for ways to reduce your expenses and you really have nothing to cut, negotiating your bills can be a big savings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One of the biggest ones we see is insurance.
Yeah.
All the time. I mean, how often do we see inside Roots, someone said, saving $500-$600 a year? I mean, sometimes we see a few $1,000s a year they're saving just by shopping around their insurance and shopping around their services. And like you said, Amber, just negotiating those bills.
I just did this year, and we are saving $1,000 between the few of them that we did negotiate. So
yeah. So I think, the thing is you gotta keep at it. And I would agree with what Ryan said is it is hard to getting uncomfortable. That's probably the hardest part. I remember when I got rid of my it wasn't brand new when I got rid of it, but it was a brand new car when I bought it. It was a $500 payment. And I also cut out satellite TV. And I think between the two of those, I took nearly $700 off of my budget every single month. And that extra $700 a month now I could use to build my emergency fund or pay down massive amounts of debt. And when I first did it, it sucked. It sucked so bad, but after time went on, I got to tell you, it was the best thing that I ever did because that car didn't provide the stress-free life that I was now living, or, I was getting more sleep at night because I actually had wiggle room in my budget and cash flow in my budget to be able to actually improve my finances. So it felt really bad at first, but it was short-lived because you began to realize the benefit of living below your means. And I don't think enough people have ever been there to actually understand the security that gives you. And you're like, that car wasn't worth it. That TV wasn't worth it. This is worth it, All right. Next question is, how do I manage unexpected expenses? So guys, this is a big one because obviously when people first get started with getting out of debt or taking control of their finances or budgeting or wanting to save more money, it's the unexpected expenses and, just emergencies that pop up that tend to throw off the whole plan, the motivation, the excitement. And you're like, am I ever going to get there? Right. So what would be your suggestion? Because obviously we all went through that very early on in our journeys getting out of debt.
I would say for us, I would venture to guess 75 to 80% of unexpected expenses were just poor planning on our part. It wasn't most things that are going to derail you. I mean, yes, there are big things that can derail you, but most things were like, oh my God, we got to buy school clothes this year. I totally didn't know that. It was like, really, dude? I mean, we've been doing it every year in August for years, but every year we never saved for it. And it was an unexpected expense. And so I think the reality is for people, you got to get really good at planning. You got to sit down and you got to really look at the year and what's coming up. Look at your car. Like, it's the last time you put tires on it. What's the maintenance potentially? Like get really good at looking at that because like tires is another example. I remember multiple times. Oh, we got to get new tires. How are we going to pay for this? It's like when you buy a car, they usually have 40,000 mile tires on it. So whatever your car is at, 40,000 miles, you're probably going to need new tires. Just plan for that. And we just did it. We were just terrible at that. So for us, for unexpected expenses, for me, you got to get good at planning. And I think you'll find that most expenses will not be unexpected.
Yeah, I would say when I started, it was any little thing was an emergency because the AC went out on my car or I had a medical bill that came up or whatever. And I would just freak out and just swipe a credit card. Also, never put your medical expenses on a credit card. But once I got used to saving, I mean, I had to use my savings and then rebuild it over and over and over and over again. But like last Thursday, a chunk of my tooth fell out one morning, and I was just like, oh, this is fabulous. And I went to the dentist, and it was going to cost $575 to fix. And I'm like, all right, here's the money. And I didn't even sweat it. I was just like, okay. And then it's like night and day difference between now and 6 years ago.
Yeah. Speaking of that, it brings up a funny story. Stupid things I used to do with cars. Ryan brought up tires. There's one time I justified buying a brand new car because my current car needed new tires and brakes.
I was going to say that I know somebody who did the same thing, but I wasn't going to bring that up.
Oh my gosh, stupid. And then you would sit there and justify it, and it's like, Mr. Nelson, you are upside down in your loan. We're going to roll that over your new loan. Yep, sounds great.
Yep.
Yep. Oh yeah.
I will say this now, getting back to the topic. If it's truly, and Ryan, you're right. Most of the time, it's truly not unexpected. It is poor planning, and I know you hate to hear that, particularly if you're starting off at the beginning. But let me say this: if it's truly unexpected, that's what an emergency fund's for, like Katie mentioned, right? And you hate using it. All right, you hate using it because you know what's going to have to happen is you got to stop and you've got to replenish it. But the most important thing is you didn't borrow money. You didn't go backwards. Okay. You paused. You stopped for a moment. You paid the bill with the emergency fund. Now you're going to replenish the emergency fund and get back on track. But I will say this, and I think we probably all could agree with this, is the more that you do this, and particularly when you get out of debt, right, you can have an emergency fund and something truly unexpected can happen. And the more experience you have with this, you just sort of deal with it. It's like you don't even really notice it. You're like, okay, I'm going to move money from this part of the budget to here. I'm going to move this here. We were going to eat out twice this month, but we're going to eat out none or something like that. That's my point, is you just sort of move things around and it's like, no big deal. But that comes with experience, and you've got to get yourself to that point. And part of that is, yes, truly unexpected things are going to happen. Have an emergency fund, pay them. The more experience you get, the more savings that you eventually get. You don't even really notice them.
Reality is when you're starting out, you're going to be bad at this. There's going to be unexpected stuff that comes up probably for the first year because you're not used to thinking this way. So how you manage that at the beginning, number one, like we said, have an emergency fund, and then you're just going to have to give yourself grace. And that first year is just educating and re-educating and learning. And after you do it a while, the next year you'll start to be like, okay, Christmas, check. Birthdays, check. Thanksgiving, check. Like all these things that are going to catch you as unexpected, you're going to be so much better every year you keep doing this.
Yeah. And I want to piggyback on that with the next question because it goes well with what you just said, Ryan. Is there a way to make budgeting easier? This person asked. They said, I just can't seem to make the numbers work out, and I'm always off, especially with categories like groceries and gas. And I think what you just said is a perfect answer to that, because budgeting doing the actual budget isn't so hard. At first, maybe for the first few months, it could be, right? But what's hard is following it. It's the behaviors, it's the habits, it's the choices, but it's also like some of those things that you forget about because you just aren't used to planning and looking ahead towards your future expenses. And so I think the secret to getting better at budgeting is, like Ryan said, it takes time. Just understand that budgeting is a learned habit. It's not something that you're just going to be great at, especially when you first get started, because a lot of it is that behavior side that now that you have this plan, we got to follow it. And that's sometimes really hard to do, especially when you're getting started.
I think just reviewing your budget too, like just reviewing that budget all the time and checking it at least every few days, like it's going to make such a difference to really stay in check and follow it when you're not quite used to, managing a budget at all, right?
The other thing is use envelopes. Can't stress that enough. We've talked about that on previous episodes, particularly you mentioned in the question, groceries and gas. Use envelopes. And when there's nothing left in there, you figure out how to fix food or dinner, breakfast, lunch with whatever's at home until you get to the next paycheck. Right? Yeah. Listen, when we were getting out of debt, I found very creative ways to not use gas. Right? I mean, I would coast going down hills. Right? Just you laugh, okay? I made my own laundry detergent one time.
Yeah, okay? There you go. Yeah.
I made my own laundry. My brother laughed at me, sort of like your relationship with Ryan early on, right? he thought I was being stupid and why would you want to do all that? And then several years later, he called me up and goes, hey, I need your help. How do I deal with this credit card company who's suing me? I mean, they were literally, he'd been filed paperwork. Okay. So the point I'm trying to say is you get very creative when you look in that envelope and there's not very much left. You don't go make a trip to the grocery store without also going to the post office, without going to the bank, without going to multiple things all at one time. And that is the number one thing that I tell people: envelopes, envelopes, envelopes. Give it a try.
Yep.
Do it for 6 months. Your budgeting is going to get easier, and managing cash is going to get easier.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is also important to mention that I think having that emergency fund is so important to budgeting too. They're like best friends, the budget and your emergency fund, because your budget ain't gonna be perfect. And especially if a necessity pops up, kid gets sick, need medicine, whatever it might be, having that emergency fund is amazing, right? I mean, that's there to fall back on when your budget isn't perfect. So they work hand in hand because it keeps you out of debt because you're using your emergency fund, right? And you're not continuing that habit. So savings is really important too.
Well, and I think Chris said it, make plan, right? Go to the grocery store, go to the post office, do all your errands all at once at the same time. So you're not running out 5 times. The key to a good budget is planning.
Yeah.
Like you really got to plan, whether it's meal planning and, planning out how you're driving around for certain errands, whatever it is, the planning is what's really going to keep you focused and keep you on track.
Yeah. When it comes to groceries too, like when we started out, we paid cash. So we would save, if our budget was $200 a week for groceries, we would take $200 in cash to the grocery store, and that really helped. Like, I don't know how people are grocery shopping, but like when I go and shop with I am 100%. I mean, the grocery stores are designed. They've spent millions and millions of dollars to figure out how to get you to buy stuff. There's the reason the eggs and the milk are all the way at the back of the store, because they know you're going to walk through and probably buy 7 other things on the way back there.
Right.
So it's like, if you have cash, it was just so much easier to stick to that budget when we started at the beginning. Bring cash, because when you're walking through the aisles, it's a lot less tempting to be like, ooh, that looks good, I want to put that in the cart, because you only have so much money. When you get to the front, you don't want to be there like, oh, put that away, I don't have enough money.
Yeah, and I've been using cash the last month or so. I've been doing it. I really have cut back, and I always take a list to the grocery store. You always eat before you go to the grocery store, so you're not starving. And I get very grandiose plans of what I'm going to have for dinner, and then none of that happens because I'm so hungry by the time I get home. I make sure that I buy a pizza or something I can immediately throw in and be eating in less than 20 minutes so that I don't go out to eat after I've spent all that money on grocery shopping.
All right, guys. Next question, which is a big topic, is how do I get my spouse on board with the idea of getting out of debt? They just want to spend, and don't seem to understand how bad our situation is. And I'm stressed. What do I do?
I think the big thing is communication, is actions. You've got to at least do your part. You've got to at least communicate. Hopefully over time, the work that you're putting in, the sacrifice that you're doing, the communicating that you're doing, hopefully will wear off. That's the only thing that I could suggest. But this was always a tough one for me to answer for that very reason, because I had a spouse who got on board fairly quickly. And when she realized I was serious, it was game on.
Most couples, the mistake that they make when they first get started is they get excited. They might hear our podcast, or they might just say, feel the need that we have to get out of debt. And what happens is, we need to cut this out. We need to cut this out. We can't do this anymore. We're not going to do that anymore. And it's finger pointing. And it's like, my suggestion always is don't have a conversation about money when you first get started. First, have a conversation about, like, how does your current financial life make you feel? Talk about the emotions, talk about the stress, talk about the worry, talk about, I'm just exhausted from this. And when you go that direction, and if your spouse really cares about how you feel, or your partner cares about how you feel, they're much more willing to listen and have an ear to that, as opposed to telling them, you're not going to be able to go get your coffee anymore. You're not going to be able to go play golf anymore. You're not going to be able to go shopping anymore. You're not going to be able. All of a sudden, they're like, what? I ain't doing this, right? There's no buy-in there when they feel like they're getting everything that's, at least in their mind currently, that's important to them, taken away from them. So I think the key is really sitting down and really having those beginning discussions of where your life currently is, How does that make you both feel? And where would you like to be? And then you can start having conversations like, okay, how do we get from here to where we want to go? And what are you willing to compromise on and sacrifice? And what am I willing to compromise and sacrifice? And having a decent understanding that, you know, the other individual, they may not want to cut everything out, but that's part of the whole relationship, right? Be willing to lose a battle rather than the entire war is what I tell them, right? Don't ruin the whole thing over just one little thing that they won't give up. Instead, focus on the stuff that they will give up. And I guarantee you what we see all the time is these partners come around and they're like cutting things out and willing to sacrifice on things that they weren't because, like you said, Chris, they started seeing better results. They started actually seeing less stress. There's money in the checking account. They're not fighting as much. My first suggestion is always to start with the feelings, because I feel like that's really the best start.
And so the communication side of it that I mentioned is, what's our shared goals? What's our shared dreams? What do we want our future to look like? And you're right, Brad. How do I get from where we are now to there? What do I have to give up? Hopefully the other person will give up something on their end. And the next thing you know, you're holding hands down the yellow brick road towards whatever your goals and dreams are. And when that happens, that's when the real magic happens, because now it's not me working by myself and my spouse working by herself, but it's us together. And we don't get double the results. We get quadruple the results.
And if all else fails, play the podcast in front of them. No, but really, because honestly, it turns it from like me saying, yes, I'd like to do this, or I'm feeling this way and I want to do this, to a third party kind of putting it in their ear going like, hey, these are some good ideas. It's not coming from me anymore, right? Or you.
When you're in the car doing the dishes, just while they're wandering around, like just have it on. Yep.
Yeah, because it's a third party. It works so well all the time. All right, guys, last question. And this is a good one, especially when it comes to relationships too. Says, I'm on my debt-free journey and I have cut back on a lot of spending. Because of this, I'm having to say no more often to my friends who want to go out to eat or for drinks or concerts. And these are things that I used to do without even thinking about it. But now that I have this goal to get my debt under control, I have to say no. And they're getting mad or annoyed with me. How do I handle this? This is probably the toughest thing that we have to go through with this is, at least at first, is standing up and having a backbone for your finances and being willing to say no. So you guys want to share any insight of what you guys did?
Bye.
Well, I'm going to answer this from the perspective of, I'm about to say, get lost. Listen, we're sort of serious with that, right, Ryan? There will come a moment in your journey where you realize that you're on your journey, not on somebody else's journey. Okay, that you've got things you want to accomplish, things that you want to do in life, and if they're not going to be on board with it and help you, then they're just baggage. And I hate to sound cold-hearted, but that's what I would tell anybody at this point: is if you've got somebody who isn't going to be there to support you, then maybe it's time to find somebody else. All right. At least not being cold-hearted, though, is explain to them what it is that you're trying to do and maybe encourage them to do the same thing. Because what's going to end up happening one of these days is when you keep saying no, 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 eventually you're going to be able to say yes to something that they would never, ever be able to imagine saying yes to. Mm-hmm. Then they're going to go, whoa, well, how did you do that? Do you remember all those times I said no and you got mad and annoyed at me? Well, now you see why. Okay. But the bottom line is, I hate to say it, but tell me get lost if you need to.
And I think the reality is they're not mad. And I think sometimes we think that they're mad and annoyed at us. And just personally, Brad got out of debt years ago and he started talking about a lot of this stuff. And I was quote unquote mad and annoyed at my brother. But I wasn't really mad and annoyed at my brother. I was mad and annoyed because what I was doing and what your friends are doing and what you were doing before you started doing this is just, that's the normal way we live. That's normal to us. So when we do something that's just completely abnormal, which is I want to get out of debt, the reaction is like, that's stupid. That's dumb. So what I was really mad and annoyed with is watching people do this and take away the excuses of I can't do this, because that's the way we live our lives. In my opinion, it's the way a lot of people who live in debt live this life of I live paycheck to paycheck. There's no way I can get out of debt. I'll always have a credit card. I'll always have a car payment. There's nothing I can do. And then people do it. And those people get pissed off at other people because those people are doing it. And then they come up with other excuses. Well, they must have got a lot of money. They must have good jobs, all these other reasons. So I think the reality is like these friends are not really mad and annoyed at you. They're probably just having a reaction of who do you think you are? You know, because that's some of what it is. But I do totally agree with what you said, Chris, and that's you just got to tune it out. We had people who thought we were crazy when we sold our house. We had people thought we were crazy when we told them we were doing it. I thought my brother was crazy when he was doing it. And when you get done, you get to the other side, you'll be surprised how many people then, like you said, Chris, will come and say, like, how did you do that? You know, and you can then become like, we've helped family. We've helped our family. Brad helped me. I've in turn helped people in our family do this because those same people were like, how did you do it then? You know, and these same friends that are mad at you, you'll be surprised down the road. They may not be mad. They just be mad because they can't do it or they don't have it in themselves to do it right now.
Or they might just be annoyed or upset because you're not getting together all the time.
Right.
So maybe offer other suggestions to get together, like a potluck or hang out at your house for games, or, you know, find alternatives to going out and spending money at restaurants or bars or whatever it is that you're doing on a regular basis before you started to pay off debt and get your finances in check, and look for alternatives. And if they're not willing to do that, then bye.
And let me clarify, I'm not saying be a jerk and tell them to get lost. Okay. Mentally, that's sort of what you're thinking. and Amber, you're right. You give them a chance, see if there's some other alternatives. But at the end of the day, you can just not hang around them as much, not talk to them as much.
But there are people, and I mean, you say that, Chris, but I will say, like, you may have to tell them to get lost. And I got to the point where I was comfortable cutting off people that weren't supportive of what we were trying to do. Because if they're not going to be supportive and they're just going to constantly be on me in this and that, like, I mean, I don't want to paint this picture that getting out of debt is perfect and everyone's just going to say, oh my gosh, how you did it. We irritated people and we probably lost some friendships over it. And I don't want to say that as a mean thing, but it is a reality that you are what you hang around. And if you constantly hang around people that are spending money and living above their means, you're most likely going to follow suit. Even if you want to get out of debt, if you constantly have people and you want to hang around that lifestyle, you're most likely not going to succeed if that's what you constantly are hanging around.
Yeah. And I think this is why we started this podcast, because getting out of debt is a lonely road. It is. There's not a lot of people who do it. There's a lot more people doing it now than when we started all doing it. But I think you got to realize that it is going to be a lonely road. What you're going to do is going to be weird. It's going to be foreign to most people, and they're not going to understand it. So I think getting yourself around information like this, getting yourself around podcasts, getting yourself around a community of people, join our Life Without Payments Facebook group, and start getting into some of these areas where these people are having these different discussions, people who are wanting to achieve some of the things that you want to. And you'll be surprised at the new relationships that pop up. I mean, heck, me and Chris, I didn't know Chris. Chris and I met at a training about financial coaching back in like 2015. Almost 10 years ago now. We're friends now. It's like you meet new people that compliment you and will help you and will be able to encourage you along with what you want to do. But the sad reality is you may lose some friends, and you likely will. But that's okay. You'll find new ones that will support you. All right, guys, if you want to pay off debt, save more money, and take control of your finances and start seeing some amazing results here in just the next 30 to 60 days, all you have to do is head over to debtfreedad.com, click on the green button at the top of the page, and we're going to show you how you can get started. Hey, we get that getting out of debt isn't easy, but with our help and with your consistency and discipline, we promise you guys, this will be some of the best work that you guys do in your entire life. Thanks for joining us on today's show, and we will see you guys on the next episode.